episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdeljabbar. What's up, man? How are you?
Chilling, man, as per usual. How about yourself?
Pretty good. I just watched a video of that. I was like, man, I really do steal Larry David's line. I do it without even like it's just natural to me at this point.
It's part of your
I've just like
MO,
adopted that in my everyday speech. Pretty good. Like even in normal circumstances, like people ask me how I'm doing. It's pretty. But we are continuing our discussion on Elon Musk because Danny hates his guts for some reason. And if you listen to the last one, I mean, I don't really have strong feelings on Elon Musk. I neither hate him or love him. I just kind of see him as a flawed, powerful man who does some good, does some bad, does some pretty cringy stuff at the same time. But you are building the case against Elon Musk, and I guess I'm challenging you on some of your points that you're making, even though I'm probably not the best challenger because I'm not, again, an Elon Musk apologist, but sometimes I think you liberals just go a little too far with your hatred. I'll be honest. Just looking at your show notes.
You clearly don't remember the content of our last.
I agreed. I mean, I agreed with you on a lot of stuff about it is kind of concerning how much power he has. But then you kind of like tearing him apart on Tesla and saying that he wasn't a great CEO. I'm like, come on, Danny. He was a good CEO. And you're like, that's just because he's had so much wealth. He was able to, take these blows and losses. And I was like, well, Danny, that's a skill in itself. Being super rich is a skill. It's a technique to be super rich and to be able to take the blast radius of companies that are struggling. But nonetheless, we're going to continue our discussion because the episode went longer than we thought, and we still have a lot more to talk about. So I'll let you kick it off. Like, where do you want to take this?
Well, I'll start by saying that I dislike your characterization of my points on the last episode, and if you want the real one, you can listen to that last episode. I'm not gonna completely rehash everything, but I can do a quick one for those who are not interested / people who are coming in for this episode and just want to keep listening. So last time we took a closer look at Elon's story, and I put out the case that a lot of his accolades don't really hold up well to scrutiny. And of course, Henry disagreed, and the internet has been both agreeing and disagreeing with me. So it kind of shows it was a good topic to talk about because everyone's got an opinion on it. So I think I made some cases around, that while Elon is celebrated as a genius who built some industry-defining companies from scratch, that the reality of those were far murkier. Some quick points, not to rehash everything, but went over how the fact that he didn't create PayPal, he didn't create Tesla, he didn't create reusable rockets. Again, I'm using the word create very specifically. He bought into these existing ventures, and I was very apologetic or crediting him in saying that he was a good investor. And some of the things that he invested in took off and made him a lot of money, and I gave him credit there. So don't really like that you didn't hear that part, Henry, but okay.
I did hear that part. I'm creating myself a straw man to fight against in the spirit of debate. Because on this episode, what your plan is to compare him to other historical figures.
That's
like
right.
Hitler,
so,
right?
Yeah, like in short, like he
like Hitler.
You got me there. No, I'm not going to compare him to Hitler. Y'all can do that in the comment section. What I'm trying to say is that he bought into, branded, and made sure that his name stuck in the marquee. And no matter where on this debate you land over Elon's merits, there's one thing that just about everyone can agree on is that the man holds an extraordinary amount of power right now. And my question, of course, becomes like how, and by how I don't necessarily mean like you have a bunch of money. because there's plenty of billionaires who you could argue don't have anywhere near the kind of access or influence or geopolitical weight that Elon does, right? So I think the answer actually lies in a combination of his wealth, tech infrastructure, and absolutely perfect political timing. Elon didn't just invest in companies. He did, of course, but he embedded himself into basically the machinery of modern life, and he made himself indispensable to governments and militaries and media ecosystems, and in some cases, voters. And so I think he built something bigger than just any one individual product. I think he built influence. And I think it's kind of interesting to look at. And to understand how that influence works, you have to look back not just at Silicon Valley, but at the original like American kingmakers, this group of unelected titans who shaped the world from behind the curtains. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. A little bit more history, a little less shitting on Elon, just making some comparison points to some folks there.
So who do you want to start with?
I think probably the best one to start with, probably easiest low-hanging fruit would be JP Morgan, right?
And JP Morgan's an interesting one because you're choosing a banker financier.
Yep. So the reason why I'm choosing this, I'll get to the specifics there, but this financier and how private money works to shore up government and then extracts favors from it, basically. So we'll talk about that. We'll get to
JP. I mean, not JP Morgan Senior died before World War I kicked off, but his son was a big influence in starting World War I. Well, not starting World War I, but in pushing the Wilson government to join the war effort, because JP Morgan was basically underwriting the Allied war effort, and they had a lot of exposure in England and France, and they're basically acting like as a purchasing agent for them.
Yep.
So when the Allies were going to lose, or if the Allies didn't win the war, because it was either going to be before the U.S. entered the war was either going to end up in a stalemate or in an unfavorable peace to the Allies, especially when in 1916 or so, they basically really pressured the Wilson government to join the war effort when he campaigned on not going into the war. So It's interesting that you're comparing him really to J.P. Morgan Sr., not his son,
the elder. So. Although you could make some pretty good points, and I think you have made some fantastic points about the younger Morgan. But I do want to focus on the older Morgan because I think there's some more parallels that are there outside of the obvious. So just for those who aren't totally familiar with J.P. Morgan's background, he was obviously a titan of American finance. He reshaped the industrial economy. And he's from Hartford, Connecticut, and he basically entered the banking scene pretty early and eventually partnered with Anthony Drexel in 1871 to form Drexel Morgan & Co., which later becomes J.P. Morgan & Co. And under his leadership, that firm played a central role in creating U.S. Steel, General Electric, and International Harvester, and basically consolidated those industries and stabilized a lot of volatile markets around those. Now, what's kind of important is during the Panic of 1893, the U.S. gold reserves dwindled, and this obviously threatened national credit. And so by 1895, in the early part of that, Grover Cleveland, the then president, turned to J.P. Morgan. And in February of 1895, Morgan put together this basic group of private financiers that provided $65 million in gold to the U.S. government. And that's today about $2.2 billion. And that was in exchange for a 30-year government bonds, right? And so while Morgan didn't provide the entire sum personally, he orchestrated the deal, right? And he leveraged his connections with European banks and positioned himself as like this indispensable, like economic stabilizing force. And so the move restored a lot of confidence in the U.S. markets, and it highlighted how, basically one private financier could wield kind of near sovereign authority, during a crisis like this. And if we fast forward to 2024, the election cycle, I can kind of draw a parallel between Elon contributing, approximately $277 million to support Donald Trump, and his allied Republican candidates, and he became one of the largest political donors in U.S. history. Now, I know the circumstances are very different, right? Two completely different situations, but I think the parallel here is pretty clear to me. Both men deployed a vast financial resources to secure influence over national policy. So Morgan he lent a lot of gold to save the dollar, and Elon spends a bunch of cash to steer the political direction of the government, especially one likely to favor deregulation, private contracting, defense deals, things like that.
See, all right, here's my thing. I mean, you already said it. They're very different circumstances. So in one case, JP Morgan is actually putting his money to save the US dollar, to bail out the US government. What Elon Musk did with Donald Trump is what tons of rich people do, or tons of like incredibly wealthy billionaires do. They lobby for political influence to, either favor their business enterprises in the case of Elon Musk, or their ideological position in the case of someone like the Adelson family.
Wouldn't you be able to argue though that in both cases, Morgan didn't do this out of the kindness of his heart, right? It was to gain influence.
Well, that's the
point I'm trying to make.
What's similar between the two, I don't think is it's more so that's just that they're extremely wealthy. Like that's the commonality between Morgan and Musk. I think the circumstances are very, very different in my mind.
Okay, well, let's move on because there's still more there. That's my first point. So I want to talk a little bit about like critical infrastructure and industry, because this is where I see them starting to get, maybe this is where you will start seeing them being a little bit closer. So beyond the bailout, Morgan left, his mark through, industrial consolidation. So think railroads. Post 1893, Morgan reorganized failing lines, including Northern Pacific Railway, stabilized a fractured transport sector in that way. Steel. In 1901, he merged Carnegie Steel into U.S. Steel, and he created the first billion-dollar corporation, cementing U.S. dominance in global steel. In electricity, Morgan helped General Electric. He created General Electric, and that was in 1892. That put together Edison General Electric and Thomas Houston to power, the then electrical revolution. And each move deepened Morgan's control over these core infrastructure and help steer national economic policy around it. Now, you can compare this in a more tech-forward way to SpaceX and Starlink, which are Elon's infrastructural leverages. So Elon, he founded SpaceX, and that was in 2002. And SpaceX is now the dominant U.S. launch provider. They get more than $15 billion in government contracts from NASA, the Department of Defense, and the U.S. Space Force. And the reusable rocket technology that he didn't pioneer, but definitely commercialized, it basically reduced the launch costs and enhanced national launch capabilities, which is very similar to how Morgan reorganized the failing lines of the railroads, right? So we're not traveling on land anymore. We're going into space. Similar idea. Meanwhile, Starlink, which is SpaceX's global satellite internet network, has been integrated into military operations, including in places like Ukraine. And its capacity to provide secure and decentralized communications in combat zones has obviously made it kind of a critical piece to U.S. defense infrastructure. And now Elon holds a privately controlled asset that like entire governments depend on in wartime. And this is kind of a 21st century power move, and I think that the similarities there are Morgan took critical industries and made them stronger, but in so doing became super indispensable. And I think Elon's kind of doing the same thing right now. By the way, none of this is, I'm not saying anything bad about this or, trying to shit on Elon, just making the comparisons here.
Yeah, I think there's a comparison to be made. I mean, I think without Elon Musk, without Starlink, the war probably wouldn't have lasted this long. based off what I've read, the war in Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
like it's been pretty crucial for them. And, but Starlink isn't the only satellite constellation that the Pentagon uses. They have their own satellite constellations.
Of course not, but there's more Starlink satellites out right now than there are any public or like government owned ones.
Yeah, like what are the ones? It's like wideband global satcom or I don't know what like the number, like Starlink versus like the Pentagon ones. But
I forgot exactly how many launches he did this year, but it's just a ridiculous amount. Let me find out real quick. So this year, if we're just talking about like Starlink launches, there have been 28 Starlink launches, and it comprised of about 7,195 satellites in orbit. It's like a shit ton of 7,195. Mm-hmm.
Holy shit. I thought 700 sounded like a lot.
So just I mean, this is like critical infrastructure, right? Like back in the 1800s or late 1800s, early 1900s, like rail was super important and steel was super important and electricity was super important. Right now in the 21st century, in the 2020s, space shit is important, right? And he's kind of doing that. I guess one not great one would be the Boring Company. So, Elon attempted to reshape ground transportation, which is kind of like the parallel to the rail, like the more direct parallel to the rail with Morgan. And, the Boring Company has made, let's call it mixed results. Their flagship project, which was the Las Vegas Convention Center loop, which we talked about on the last one, that's a 1.7 mile tunnel system that uses Tesla vehicles to shuttle attendees beneath the convention center campus, and the idea was to reduce ground traffic. It was built for $47 million, and it's been widely criticized for underwhelming capacity and being a little bit overhyped. Of course, this was their test run, but Elon's promised like a hyperloop and different kinds of underground transportation like that forever, and hasn't really been able to get any moves on that one. But nevertheless, though, what I think is worth comparing is that Morgan and Elon do differ in industry and era, and in some cases in situational, but they both demonstrate how private capital can shape these public systems, which are wildly important, for their times, right? Morgan stabilizing the economy and molding American industry through coordinated, bailouts and mergers. Elon using his wealth to gain influence politically, getting a lot of defense infrastructure out of the tail end of that, and of course public discourse. In both cases, influence here is it's really the investment that they're making. Yes, there are material investments that they're making for each of these industries and the products that they're delivering. But I think the end goal here, or the most impactful thing, is the influence that they invested in, and becoming basically a dependent partner, or having the U.S. be dependent on these individuals. And it kind of raises the same question. When some billionaire or very wealthy person controls essential infrastructure, like who's in charge, right?
Well, the thing is, though, that's like the point I kind of get liberals with, is that there's like a lot of I feel like the topic itself about Elon Musk, because he's so politicized now, he's so polarizing that people kind of liberals shriek about him, but at the same time, the point, like I've told this to you, that I do think that they have a point, that this guy has a lot of power over a lot of different industries, and he has like a lot of influence. And I don't know, sometimes I think maybe it's really not that bad if the guy is benevolent. If there's like a benevolent billionaire, then it would be great, right? Like, it wouldn't be a bad thing if it was like some
I don't
benevolent
think
guy.
anyone's benevolent.
Exactly.
Period,
That's the
let
problem
alone
with
billionaires.
that. That's the problem with that.
You know?
With that idea. It's like no one's really benevolent. But I think that's most concerning is that, this guy has his interest, and his interest is to just like kind of dominate global industry and go to space, and he has all these kind of visionary ideas. At the same time, though, when one person has accumulated so much power, it's not that much. I'm not as concerned about like their vision, but it's like way easier to influence that person. So
Yeah.
let's say if he has like, it's like one target, and it's easier, for
Single
vested
point of
interest.
failure is what you're saying.
What's
Mhm.
that?
Yeah. Single point of failure is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's a single point of failure. So let's just say if there's a bunch of billionaires and their interests are kind of spread out, and the money's kind of in the hands of a lot of different people, it's harder. It takes a bigger effort to like. It takes a more coordinated effort to influence that entire industry, because then there's always going to be conflict of interest. But if it's just one single person, then it's easier to influence that one single person by, we can even say things by any means, by either, in the case of Elon Musk has a lot of pressure from like the ADL. So when he bought Twitter, essentially the ADL put like pressure campaigns on him for, basically saying they were going to like ruin his monetization process, and they were going to make Twitter essentially toxic for advertisers, where that would be Twitter's main sense of income.
Well, he kind of did that to himself, to be honest.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean,
that's a really good segue, though. That's a great segue, because I wanted to talk about another one, right?
Sure.
So another one that I think is very relevant to this Twitter conversation is Rupert Murdoch, right? So Rupert Murdoch, he's from Melbourne, Australia, and he inherited his father's newspaper, The News, in 1952. And then he launched rapid expansion across Australia and New Zealand. In 1969, he entered the UK market. He purchased The News of the World and later The Sun. And then in 1974, he acquired the New York Post. And over the following decades, he built a media empire that included Wall Street Journal and also the founding of Fox Broadcasting Company. By the early 2000s, his company, which was then called News Corp, controlled 800 companies across 50 plus countries. Murdoch Media Holdings became, I would say, deeply embedded in U.S. politics. So I want to talk through a few of those things.
Well, let me throw a comparison to you. So Murdoch in the 1980s, and especially the 90s, probably more so in the 90s, the media was starting to be seen as a lot more liberal. Really, since Nixon, the media was like, oh, the liberal media. So what developed was, through the 80s and 90s was like conservative talk radio pundits, like Rush Limbaugh and guys like that. And basically there was this really big market, because these radio shows had millions and millions and millions of listeners. Like Rush Limbaugh in his prime had fucking millions of listeners. There was such a big market for, conservative punditry that Rupert Murdoch, he essentially capitalized off that. He basically made Fox News like the TV version for that audience. So there was like this market that existed. And I think there's a lot of similarity there with Twitter, because essentially Twitter was like probably more left leaning. I don't know if there was like an equalizer between Democrats and Republicans. Maybe there was. I wasn't really paying attention to it that much prior to the to the Musk takeover. I wasn't like looking at the statistics of it. But I think what he did with Twitter is, now that you go on it, it's like a bunch of like right wing slop. If you just scroll around, it's like this. It's just like all slop. Like Like, this transgender teacher's trying to turn her students gay. This.
All right, let's.
It's.
I fully want to have that conversation, but one point that you brought up, specifically in the 80s and specifically about like this wave of, more right-wing talk radio pundits and things like that. I think there is an angle here, and I want to show you that thread. So I want to start in the 1980 presidential election. So Ronald Reagan, his team credited Murdoch's New York Post with helping secure Reagan's victory in New York specifically, right? And you can, I'm not like a giant like Reagan historian or anything like that, so you can say what you want about that, but his team did credit Murdoch's New York Post with helping them win that very vital state in New York. And later, that loyalty was rewarded. So in 85, Murdoch, who was then still an Australian citizen, receives a special waiver from the FCC's foreign ownership rules, which allowed him to acquire more local TV stations, right? And these TV stations that he acquired would form the foundation of Fox Broadcasting. He later becomes a U.S. citizen shortly after to cement that compliance, but he got this extra, favor from the Reagan administration because he helped him to win that election. And then later on, in 1987, there's the FCC then dismantles this fairness doctrine. And the fairness doctrine is basically built on this idea. It was created in 49, and it required that broadcasters cover issues of political importance and present opposing viewpoints on those issues in a fair and balanced manner. So if you were going to be on TV and you were going to cover the news, you had to present opposing viewpoints on it. And that was the rule by the FCC from 1949 until 1987 during the Reagan administration under the FCC chairman, Dennis Patrick. And the reason why they dismantled this? Well, there was a rise of cable TV and expanded media options that supposedly made the doctrine, quote unquote, no longer necessary, right? So that was incredibly helpful for Murdoch because this sets the stage for Murdoch's Fox News, which later debuts in 1996. Remember, now he has the ability to buy up all of these local TV stations, which was the foundation for Fox Broadcasting, and there is no more fairness doctrine. So we can make a news show or a news channel, a news outlet that really only looks at one side of the news, right?
I just will say that this wasn't like unheard of before. So, like FDR was like super rewarding of like positive of media outlets that would give him positive press. And
of
like
course.
FDR would straight up like, fucking put people in jail. like people in the media he didn't like in jail.
Yeah, of course. I'm not levying any blame or making any criticisms. I'm just laying out the story as it was, right? And that's important because obviously we all know that Fox News is incredibly important, specifically for the Republicans and all the presidents that were voted in since Fox News was a thing. But skipping ahead because we don't have time to cover every single presidential election. Specifically 2016, Fox News plays obviously a really big role in Donald Trump's rise. And according to the Shorenstein Center at Harvard, Trump received more favorable and sustainable coverage from Fox than any other candidate. He appeared on Fox over 100 times during the primaries and benefited from frequent like soft interviews and, especially from hosts like Sean Hannity. And some studies estimate that he received the equivalent of $2 billion in free media coverage, and much of it coming, of course, from Fox, so the Murdoch conglomerate. And internal communication.
I'd want to go deeper into that because a lot of the media coverage he received wasn't just from Fox. A lot of it was on social media, and a lot of it was just a lot of the media coverage was through
definitely
negative.
Get to the,
was through negative.
100% get to the. We'll 100% get to the social media because Elon Musk conversation, and Twitter specificess
But
just following the line of
as someone who was watching Fox though in 2016, a lot of the it wasn't necessarily like fully pro-Trump. The desired candidates from that kind of wing, which is, I guess, what you'd call establishment Republicanism at the time. Now Donald Trump is establishment Republican politics, but at the time he wasn't necessarily. A lot of the favorable press coverage from Fox was actually towards people like Ted Cruz and before Jeb Bush kind of flamed out of the election of the primary. A lot of the positive press was actually towards them. It was individual people at Fox that were the ones who were giving him softball interviews, like Sean Hannity is like a big opportunist. So he kind of allied himself with Trump in the Fox News wing. But a lot of people like Megyn Kelly were really pretty, and Megyn Kelly was like their like one of their big stars on Fox News. She fucking hated him at the time. Like, remember that debate where he said that he basically said that, I don't know what her problem, she must be under period or something.
Right. She must be
he
bleeding
said something
out of
like
her whatever.
Blood was coming out, she was bleeding out of her eyes and her, like whatever. Paraphrasing it, but basically he said like, yeah, she had her period, so she was being a bitch. That was, it was a lot more divided. But I know what you're saying.
Again, I'm not making the argument that Fox News was a monolith, right? What I am making
it's
the
much
argument
more of a monolith
is,
now than it was then.
Oh, of course, right. But what I'm trying to say is that this is a Murdoch property, and actually some internal communications that were leaked in the media later revealed that during that 2016 election cycle that a lot of the executives at Fox were questioning and were seeing a top-down directive that was favoring the Trump campaign after a certain period, right? And this is fairly like open. You can go and Google for it. You can find
all these networks have a top-down agenda. The same thing with CNN. They found out what Jeff Zucker was like, basically telling pundits what to say on air.
Right. Exactly.
They all have their top-down thing. Because you know what happened with the media, and I don't want to derail. I know we're talking about Musk, and I don't want to derail this conversation too much into like the media culture over the past 10 years, but essentially, all of these networks have their like studio heads, and like the what is said comes down from the top level down to their pundits. These people are not paid to have their independent views. They're paid to push the narratives. They're
paid to push whatever narrative is coming from on high. Exactly.
Whether that be Fox News doing a pro-Trump one, or whether that be CNN doing an anti-Trump one. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Not debating that whatsoever. Just following the specific track of Rupert Murdoch so that we can compare it to Elon Musk later, right? So Rupert Murdoch owns Fox, and the directive from Fox at the time was to, promote Trump. And he won, and later the Trump administration reciprocated that influence that he gave, that Murdoch afforded to him through his media platform. So Murdoch had direct phone access to Trump, spoke to him frequently. Specifically, though, Trump's FCC under Ajit Pai eliminated regulations that benefited Murdoch's media interests, right, including the repeal of the main studio rule and easing ownership caps on a lot of these different media conglomerates. And the DOJ also fast-tracked the Disney-Fox merger, if you remember that from back in the day, while simultaneously attempting to block AT&T's merger with CNN's parent company, which was viewed as obviously politically motivated, right? These are two very like and very similar mergers. One got fast tracked, the other one got blocked, right? And so, like Murdoch, and here's where we can bring in Elon Musk. Elon controls a media platform with an immense political influence, Twitter. And so obviously that one launched in 2006 as a microblogging site, and it grew to real-time, to this like real-time public square for, political messaging. And Trump in particular, I think he mastered its use by, to bypass traditional media. So kind of backpedaling a little bit from what we were saying. It wasn't all Fox News that got him elected, right? Certainly wasn't the case, because the growing social media sphere, Elon started acquiring Twitter shares in early 2022. And then after what was a pretty dramatic series of reversals and lawsuits and, fucking clusterfuck, he finalized his deal to acquire Twitter for $44 billion on October 27, 2022. And fun fact, just this week, I think it was, or last week, I'm forgetting, super recently, he just sold X to his AI company, XAI. And so that one's a little weird, and I'm not like super qualified to talk about this one, but from what I understand, it was a way for him to like dump one property into the other one and count it as a loss of $11 billion, but he still owns everything. I don't know. It's a weird one. I'm going to have to look into that one more, but it's just like an interesting development. It's not super relevant for this conversation. But coming back to...
it is actually pretty interesting, though, because you imagine... I don't know if that gives X dominion over like I guess maybe they already had, but able to, perhaps they're able to use all of the text in Twitter in their AI properties now. I don't know how that works. You probably know more than that.
They were already doing that.
Okay, I figured they were already doing that, but I don't know if that made that process easier or not. That's what I thought immediately when you said that, when you told me about the purchase or the...
As far as I've read, this is more of like a financial move, right? And again, not super qualified to talk about this specifically, but there's just some like tax trickery that he's doing there, which fucking all billionaires do it. So I'm, again, not really shitting on Elon particularly for doing something like this, but it's apparently just like a tax scheme so that he can say that he lost money, but still have still have more ownership over it than he did before, and not have any of the negative parts of losing a lot of money. It's weird. Again, I'm not qualified to talk about this. I don't want to get too deep into it. All right, so we just had a major audio issue, so definitely lost my train of thought from what I was saying. So if this part sounds jarring or doesn't match the last part, it's probably because I've already forgotten what the last thing we said was. So we were talking about Twitter and how Elon acquired it and purchased it for $44 billion. And then in a couple of days, he ends up firing a bunch of the top executives and initiated a bunch of mass layoffs that gutted moderation teams and disbanded their quote unquote trust and safety councils. And this is all just stuff that he did and stuff that he tends to do when he acquires new companies. He also reinstated numerous banned accounts, openly promoted for hands off approach for content moderation. And as Henry has said himself, it's been a bit of a cesspool, right? Hate speech is
I agree, it's definitely been a cesspool, but I prefer that no one be banned than people be banned.
Yeah, not making the argument that things should be banned.
But it is there's the only thing on X that I wish were not on it are the fucking like snuff films that pop up on my feed. And I've said this before, man. I'll be scrolling through it, and then all of a sudden I'll see someone get hit by a car. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, I do not want to see that.
Yeah.
That's the only shit that I was like, I wouldn't mind if that type of shit was not allowed on the platform.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the challenge of these types of platforms, right? Because you might not want to see that, but unfortunately, some people do. You know,
Well, what
and
happens is that you look at it and it'll be like, the Twitter account will be like, fuck around, find out.
right,
And then someone will be like screwing around with something.
mm-hmm.
And then they'll get like caught in a fucking like industrial like meat cutting machine. And like you're watching it because you just like can't not look. You're like, what the fuck's about to happen?
Right.
And you'll see it and you'll be like, holy shit. And
Right.
then X will be like, oh, this guy's a fucked up guy who likes watching snuff films, and it will just feed you that shit over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
So it makes
that's
this
how
loop.
algorithms work, right?
Yeah, I mean, even the stuff with like Palestine too, man. I mean, it's important for those videos to be on the internet, in my opinion, because you want to witness the horrors that are going on. But at the same time, it's terrible to like look at videos of children missing limbs and people burning in fires and that, like, it haunts you.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you're gonna see a lot of like kind of hateful shit on it, but in my opinion, it's better for that stuff to be in the light than in the shadows, because when that stuff is in the shadows, it's more or less it just becomes even more toxic. And then
that's where it like pressure cooks, right? And then it blows up in ways that you don't want it. At least when it's out in the open, you can just call people out on their shit and move on, right? But yeah, I bring up the cesspool nature of X right now, not because I'm trying to shit on Elon specifically, but because you were making a point earlier, like before our technical malfunction, about how the group, I forgot the group that you were talking about, was trying to make it, the ADL was trying to make it, kind of a pain in the ass for him to get advertisers,
ad revenue.
But that actually ended up happening anyway, with or without the ADL's influence. His major advertisers fled the platform. He was like quoted, like famous for saying like, go fuck yourself to the advertisers that left. He was like, you're gonna like, try to, I don't remember the exact quote he said. He's like, you're going to try to like extort me for money or some shit like that. Like, go fuck yourself. And he said it like twice, to be very clear, in the interview that he had. He did a couple of things, like he did the paid verifications, and that was kind of funny because then there were like impersonator accounts of Elon Musk saying stupid shit, right? And that also undermined the trust in that platform overall, and it's not been turning a profit. You can't really see that specifically because it's a private company now, but it's not been a profitable venture, and that's evidenced by that fairly recent move to have XAI purchase it. At I think they purchased it at $45 billion. Technically, it was like $1 billion more than Elon bought it for, but he's reporting an $11 billion loss. So again, not super. I don't want to go back into that because I'm not qualified to talk about it, but some weird shit going on in there. Clearly it's not as fruitful as I think Elon would hope for, but nevertheless, Elon's influence on X has been, pretty impactful, and I would even say overly political, for a guy who...
Well, a lot of the accounts on X now, because I think you get paid off your video shares and your viewer amount. So a lot of the people on it are just like rage baiters or like content farmers. So they just like you just put videos or put content up that that's going to get a reaction, so you get as much views as possible. Not really like a dialogue. It's like, what can I put up to like have this shared as much as possible?
Right.
Like, what buttons can I push? And that's like what the majority of it is, like people trying to game the system. A lot of these political accounts, they're not even who talk about US politics, they're not even based out of the United States. There's this guy named Ian Miles Chong and he's a right-wing influencer on X, and he's from Malaysia. He doesn't live in the United States. He's a Malaysian citizen, and he's like a big right-wing Twitter account because he just knows how to game. I don't even think he's like probably political in real life. He just knows how to game the Twitter system to get lots of views. So that's what the majority of the platform is now. Just a bunch of like rage baiters who are, putting controversial stuff on to get as much spread as possible.
Sure. I mean,
due to whatever.
What I find pretty interesting about it is that, it's become very political specifically, right? And, there's the idea that, when he was purchasing it, by he, I mean Elon, wanted to kind of restore freedom of speech on the platform. And, one of the major things that they did was the Twitter files to kind of, prove that somehow the government was colluding with Twitter to, shadow ban or do political content moderation. There was, this internal discussion on the Twitter team debating like labeling or removing tweets that were related to sensitive topic like COVID-19 or election fraud or the Hunter Biden laptop story. And, some critics argued that showed a bias against conservative voices or overreach in censoring dissenting opinions. The leadership, on the other hand, had claimed that they were just attempting to follow their own content policies under, what was obviously pretty intense public scrutiny. Look at a bit more on the laptop story. This was super controversial. Twitter had decided in 2020 to limit the sharing of the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. Twitter cited concerns about, that it was possible hacked material, and later acknowledged that they believed that their censorship of the topic was a mistake. And there's a lot of like back and forth on this, and I don't want to dive too much on specifically the Twitter files. Whether or not
that's a blast from the past. It seems like it happened like 20 years ago, right?
It was like just a handful of years ago, 5 years ago.
Well, I remember that. So that he gave it to, I think, Matt Taibbi, who I think is great. And then Barry Weiss, who I think is terrible. Barry Weiss is just like a Mossad agent. But Matt Taibbi's good. And basically what they discovered was that essentially they were like having meetings with, Twitter was having meetings with the government.
Right, FBI, DHS, ODNI.
Yeah. Yep. And essentially there was no like direct order to Twitter, like, hey, like you need to censor these accounts. But they were like basically like synergies together about like what the FBI would like to see.
Right.
And like what the government would like to see. And
ultimately, though, it was Twitter's choice, right? Like they chose.
It wasn't like the federal government mandated them to restrict the accounts, but they were putting pressure, I guess, soft pressure on them to do it,
right?
To do the most of this stuff. So when they say ban conservative accounts, like they're not banning Ben Shapiro,
right?
Like I think Ben Shapiro is one of the most boosted pundits online on any social media platform.
Right.
They're banning people who were speaking out against like COVID vaccines. And then people who were more so
election
like
fraud stuff, Hunter Biden laptop stuff.
Like people who were going against like a narrative that the government found like a priority to protect. Like they don't care about someone fucking arguing about tariff policy or something or someone arguing about like some stupid social issue.
Right.
Like women and the transgender shit. They don't really care that much about that. They care more about like, we want to ban people who are putting stuff on putting misinformation about vaccines. Even before It's kind of funny though. This is kind of something that will might send the conversation to different directions. I don't want to go too far into it, but even prior to Elon Musk taking over Twitter, there was a degree of like freedom on the war stuff, on like the war in Syria, the war in
Yemen,
in Palestine. In May of 2021, when was I forgot what year this was. Was it 2021? It was, or 2020. When Hamas launched rockets into Israel in response to,
that was 2018, I think.
That was Trump wasn't president. Biden was president. I think it was 2020. It was May 2020. It was the first year Biden was in office.
Okay.
And there was about, the Israelis had a strike on Gaza. They basically, the IDF went into outside of Gaza, decided not to go in. They had a bombing campaign that killed like 800 to 1,000 people. The pro-Palestine stuff was huge on Twitter then. Like, it was actually like a lot more than I suspected. And I think that stuff is actually being more suppressed now than it was before.
Sure.
Because what's being highlighted on X is more of like the the straight up like, oh, we love Hitler type, like that kind of stuff. I feel like that stuff is actually being highlighted more than a lot of like just like the normal pro-Palestine stuff that's not like crazy. He doesn't get too crazy into like the JQ and stuff like that. I think this stuff, the more anti-Semitic stuff, is being promoted more now, because I think that a lot of the kind of like Zionist people who have influence through like the ADL, they rather have that stuff go around than the more legitimate stuff, because that stuff kind of makes the pro-Palestine people look nuts.
Well, I mean, just to kind of tie a little bow on this, because we're losing track of the Murdoch and Elon thing, I think what's interesting about this, moderation policies, pre and post Elon, is that, what we found from the Twitter files was that there was a thing called visibility filtering, where tweets could be downranked or accounts could be limited in search or discoverability without like an outright ban, which is what Twitter chose to do rather than outright bans, whether as a direct influence of government request or through their own content policy moderation, right? And that was one of the bigger revelations. And what's interesting is that Musk bought Twitter to restore kind of this free speech and stop a lot of this banning and shadow banning. But Musk has admitted that visibility filtering still exists under his leadership. But now it's just more
of course that
personal,
still exists.
Yeah. So anyone who criticizes Musk is now shadow banned.
There's definitely a degree of people like personally insulting something that he him or I think there are some people who were banned after the H-1B visa thing,
right?
Who like directly criticized the policy, his views on it. However, I think he flat out said, like the same mantra that the previous group that had Twitter.
I got a good quote from him. He said,
freedom of
speech doesn't mean freedom of reach. And he said that
exactly.
In 2022.
So that's like the exact same thing as the last group.
Right.
But now it's more so based off, whatever the agenda of, him and his.
Probably the funniest one that I saw,
interest that
because he has done outright bans and suspensions. The funniest one I think is, again, he was like pissed off that people like Trump get banned, but he banned Elon Jet. Do you know that account? It was the account that was tracking his private jet flights due to using like the public FAA data. Even though he had personally tweeted in November of 2022 that he wouldn't ban it because of his freedom of speech policies, he ended up banning them anyway, which is, probably
annoying to him.
It was. And it's his
I would
company.
ban that
And
too,
like,
though.
look, I was sticking up for Twitter back when they were owned by Jack Dorsey, saying like, it's a private company, it's a private platform. They could do whatever the fuck they want. And if they want to ban you for a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason, that's their choice. So I will afford Elon the same, like, intellectually honest opinion. It's his company. He can do whatever the fuck he wants, right?
Well,
and I think the outcome of that is that it's not making any money, and it's probably a giant money pit for him right now, which is why he had to do a lot of that clever accounting that we've been trying not to talk too much about because I'm not qualified to. But to bring this back to our original like Murdoch comparison, in many ways, Elon's platform now, it functions as a digital replacement for cable news, right? People typically like, especially because a lot of the boomers that were the addicted to cable news are they're not relevant anymore, and they're being replaced by younger generations that are more chronically online than they are, right? And so Elon's platform is that digital replacement for the cable news that a lot of people like Trump would have once relied upon in the past, and now most people are relying on these internet platforms. So Murdoch builds like a centralized editorial managed empire, and Elon's power comes from platform ownership and algorithm control, right? He doesn't dictate the headlines, he just dictates what is visible, right? He boosts things that he likes, and he shadow bans things he doesn't, or he just outright bans people that he disagrees with, right? Now, but both Elon and Murdoch leveraged media to control and shape political narratives. They enable populist movements, and they definitely influence elections, right? And in the end, whether Murdoch, through Murdoch's curated broadcasts or through Elon's like decentralized echo chamber, the result is the same, right? A private actor, with a big ass megaphone, is able to tilt the course of, public discourse.
Well, I will agree with you on this. That I don't think he bought Twitter because he cares that much about freedom. He has like this huge love for freedom of speech. I think he did it for influence, and not just in the United States. I said this, I don't know if I said this last episode. I know I said this on one of our Shooting the Shit episodes, that I think he buys, I think Twitter was an operation for him to control outside, like elections in other countries, in addition to the United States.
Right.
So if he wants to get a regime installed in like Argentina, for example, I'm pretty sure I used this example before, he's going to, boost a lot of like pro-Malay stuff.
Right.
And that just may be because of he'll sign a more favorable deal with Elon for like lithium rights.
Right. Or sales of Teslas or some shit like that.
So I think it's more so that he purchased it because, I mean, he's this rich billionaire. Why not have a media apparatus behind you? And I guess he is, I think everyone knows this at this point, that social media is taking over cable news.
Right.
Cable news doesn't have the same ratings as it used to.
And it's a proven model, right? Like Murdoch showed, and Murdoch is just one example, right? There's other people like him. It's just Murdoch's probably the largest, most prominent example. Murdoch showed that you could own media or own influence over media and get political outcomes that are favorable for you out of it, out of the back end. So in that way, Elon's just taking a page out of that book and doing that, in addition to what we've already talked about, him taking up industry. So that's really all I had to say about the Murdoch bit. I've got some more, though. I want to talk about how Elon Musk is kind of like J. Edgar Hoover. This one's
now this one is kind of a stretch.
Yeah, it is. I will admit freely, it is a little bit of a stretch.
I'm having trouble understing the connection between Elon Musk and.
Yeah, I mean, so this one I probably should have like
FBI from in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, okay. I will freely admit this, but for the sake of like history talk, we can try it. And this is mostly, tied into the Twitter conversation too, by the way, so that we're not steering too far away from the original point. But Hoover, he served as the first director of the FBI from 35 until he died, right? And, for 50 years and 8 presidential administrations, he transformed the FBI into, the modern law enforcement and intelligence agency that we have today. So he, did a lot of shit. He created fingerprint databases, forensic labs, major operations against organized crime, foreign espionage, you name it, right? But Hoover's greatest power was probably in what he kept secret. So he maintained these private and oftentimes very salacious intelligence files on political leaders and civil rights figures and public figures. And he used it as a way to maintain his position and deter critics against him. So some of the notable targets were John F. Kennedy. So Hoover tracked JFK's extramarital affairs, including, alleged liaisons with women that were tied to organized crime. And those files became like a shield for, because fucking Robert Kennedy wanted to remove Hoover, but they couldn't because he had all this dirt on JFK. He also had some files on Martin Luther King, and this one's actually pretty fucked up. They wiretapped him. They bugged his hotel rooms. They got a lot of intimate recordings of him. And in 1964, the FBI anonymously mailed Martin Luther King a letter telling him to commit suicide or face exposure for all the shit that they had on him, which is really fucked up. Who else? Congressmen, journalists. So Hoover kept a lot of records on things like gambling habits or financial issues, and even in some cases sexual orientation. Basically he knew people were gay before this is at a time when being gay was criminalized. And so just threatening to disclose this information often, ensured their silence or their complacency with FBI policies. And, obviously none of this was governed by law or any kind of transparency, just knowledge that he possessed, made him politically untouchable. And, his power came from threatening to disclose information.
How is this like Elon Musk? I'm not following the comparison
it's
now.
Actually not. It's not like Elon Musk. It's the inverse of Elon Musk, right? It's backwards with Elon Musk. So where Hoover was hoarding secrets, Elon uses exposure to control people, right? So his influence wasn't based on what he conceals, but rather what he's amplifying. And the ownership of Twitter, that's where much of American political discourse, now takes place. And so after he acquired Twitter, he becomes the gatekeeper of visibility for millions of people, right? So while Hoover is, using these private documents, this private information as extortion, basically, Elon's influencing the political narrative in the opposite way. He's saying, I'm going to put out information to influence how people think and how people vote and how people govern, right? And so Twitter files, we kind of already covered this one, that was a way for him to, create a stir, notably among the Hunter Biden laptop story, right? And while there was not proof out of that Twitter file of direct government censorship, the messages that were released and the information that he put out there caused a lot of confusion and misinformation among a lot of people who vote. And that the files became, a rallying cry among conservatives who thought that this showed collusion between tech companies and government, right? And it definitely whipped people up into, a bit of a fervor. So again, I freely admitted this was a bit of a stretch, but I guess what I'm trying to make is that, information is power. The way that Hoover and Elon wields their power of information is completely opposite. But nevertheless, though, they are using information as power.
Okay. Danny.
It's not a very strong argument, I admit, but can you kind of at least see it a little bit now?
I guess. Let's go to the next person.
Okay.
Henry Kissinger.
Yeah. Okay. So Kissinger. So this is the
All
only.
right. Can I have this one's a stretch too?
Yeah. No. It totally.
How
is.
was he like a diplomat?
Well, so do I just go into it, or you want me to tell you the backstory on Kissinger too?
Everyone knows who Henry Kissinger is. We don't need a backstory on Henry Kissinger.
All right. So, just the one thing about Kissinger is that he, went around and did a lot of critical, things in diplomacy. Think he opened up normalization to China in 1972. He opened up a detente with the Soviet Union with the strategic arms limitation talks, so SALT, involved in Middle East peace negotiations. I guess, he stopped, he didn't stop. He proposed he negotiated the ceasefire in Vietnam. He got a Nobel Peace Prize for that. I guess my biggest argument here, which is not a very big one, it's just more of, Elon's, with the power that Elon has amassed and the money that he's amassed, it gives him pretty interesting and exclusive access to a lot of different diplomatic channels, right? So, for example, he's met with 13 different countries and leaders of 13 different countries talking about things ranging from trade to energy to artificial intelligence, freedom of expression, you name it, bunch of things. For instance, he also held discussions with Netanyahu, former president of Mexico, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, a bunch of other people. I think that the strongest one would be his wielding of Starlink diplomatically in the war in Ukraine, where it has supported military communications and helped them, to basically stay in the fight. But at times, deciding to pull back, at times deciding to push forward. He had red lines, and then he didn't have red lines. Basically, he's got very similar leverage as Kissinger did, where Kissinger was a direct envoy of the United States, and Elon Musk isn't, but he's kind of wielding a lot of diplomatic leverage in that way. Also, his call that he had between Donald Trump and President Zelensky, how is he on the call between those two people? That's, obviously it had to do with Starlink, right? But in a way, he's kind of a Kissinger type, because he's now not just the businessman that's providing the service, but he's also he's a diplomatic agent in that respect.
So, I mean, all right. Here's my counters to this. So,
Okay.
First and foremost, Henry Kissinger and Elon Musk are like nothing alike in terms of their background.
Sure.
So, the only thing they really have in common is that they both, in different capacities, talk to other governments about things.
Mm-hmm.
For Elon Musk, he's talking to governments about market access and things on behalf of his businesses, and of course, like military contract stuff. So Starlink being a big key thing, but I don't get the vibe that Elon Musk has like a huge interest personally in like the war in Ukraine. I think that's just a matter of him. I mean, it's U.S. policy, and he's a contractor, so he has to do it. In terms of Henry Kissinger, I mean, Elon Musk obviously knows a ton about the different businesses and fields that his industries are in, but Henry Kissinger is like a fucking, I mean, love him or hate him, he was a genius in terms of like history, in terms of just, realpolitik strategy. Like, he knew like everything about like every country. He was an expert on many different countries. He was he was a guy who like he essentially designed like for U.S. foreign policy in like the 70s. Elon Musk, he doesn't, if you hear him talk about like these different geopolitical conflicts, he doesn't really know that much about them. You can just tell he doesn't really, he has a very shallow understanding of like the war in Ukraine. You can tell he has a very shallow understanding of like the wars in the Middle East. Just by hearing him talk about it, like you could just tell he's really not that well read on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Where Henry Kissinger was obviously a professional diplomat, like he knew all these issues more than.
But I'm not saying that Elon Musk is a good diplomat, but I'm just saying that he's exercising diplomatic force. I know we had this this conversation.
There's other CEOs who talk to I mean, every major company has a government affairs team, and their jobs are to talk to other governments and to. And
I'm not saying that this is unusual or unique for Elon either. I guess I'm just bringing it up because I'm making an overall point about Elon, because I think where, Elon's not just this like, capitalist or investor, his genius, I'm arguing, is not in invention, but in this, kind of a narrative control and in this political entrenchment that he has, right? So not only is he kind of like a Kissinger in the sense that he's leveraging diplomatic, leverage over countries, because other companies do that and other billionaires do that, but he's also, controlling information flow on Twitter, and that's kind of like Hoover, maybe not really, but also very much like Rupert Murdoch, who owned a media conglomerate to basically create influence over not just the U.S. government, but in Elon's case, potentially also other worldwide governments, right? And seeing very real benefits out of having that. And then to top that all off, coming to the beginning of the conversation, he also is kind of this titan of critical industry, right? We're talking about Starlink and SpaceX and to a certain extent, I guess, didn't really talk too much about it, but also, Tesla's supercharger network is super important. We talked a lot about that in the last episode, and making himself kind of very indispensable to the government from a private industry factor. Now, all of the people that I've described are all titans of their individual areas, but Elon happens to have the infinity gauntlet of all of these fucking, key and very crucial parts. He's different from all of them and different from counterparts in those specific industries that might also engage in the same kind of practices, in the sense that he has dipped his toe in, well, I'd argue he's much farther than a toe deep. He's balls deep in a lot of different areas of control.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think with him, he's so wealthy. He has so much power over very important industries. He has so much narrative control in the palm of his hands. Mm-hmm. He kind of is like his own sovereign.
Kind of.
He's like his own sovereign. He kind of acts as like his own sovereign country to some degree, I guess.
I think he has more money than a lot of sovereign countries.
Yeah. I guess what he is like one of the really first true like tech overlords.
Yeah.
Where it's just like it's unique because he has there's all these. I think the greatest comparison to him is out of everyone you've mentioned is probably J.P. Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
Just given like the sheer wealth relative to their time that they had. Yeah, I mean, I get you. Like he kind of acts above and beyond your typical billionaire, even, someone like Bill Gates or something like that, where, Bill Gates obviously has Bill Gates talks to a lot of governments too,
right?
Or he did, and he has his different foundations,
mm-hmm.
That are meant to influence countries.
I think he makes George Soros look like poor. Yeah, in retrospect.
Well, yeah.
In both
What is
money.
George Soros is worth? What, like 10 billion?
Well, I'm not even talking about money. I'm talking about power, right? Like pouring power, because George Soros
he's
might
much
have
more powerful than George Soros.
right. He might have a lot of money, but like George Soros is the boogeyman on the right, right? The guy who's supposed to be the one paying thousands of people, to go protest or some shit like that. Meanwhile, we've got a guy who actually has like very real power and influence, as well as a shit ton more money than George Soros, And I think, look, I already said my piece in the last episode about how I don't think he's a very well qualified person to wield all of this power. So I won't go down that rabbit hole. But what I will say is that I think talking about Elon Musk in these contexts is important to talk about, because he's a figure, I think, unlike anyone in history at this point. And the impacts, both positive and negative, that Elon Musk has on our world and could have in our future are, it's innumerable, right? It's unlike anything we've ever seen. And I think it's totally fair to at least have the conversation about it.
Do you know who has more influence than Elon?
Who?
Should I say it?
Go for it.
Should I say it?
Say it.
Should I go there?
Hit me.
Maybe I just say it and you cut this part out and just go right to the intro.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we're definitely cutting that. Yeah, no, but
or just cut it like right there.
Yeah. No, not gonna happen. That's coming out.
But I mean, let's not open. We won't open up that can of, or just bleep it out.
Yeah, that actually would be funnier. I'm gonna bleep that part out. So I'm gonna leave it in, and it's gonna be bleeped out, and then you guys can insert whoever you think Henry said.
I think everyone will know what I said, but
well, maybe they won't. Who knows? It's a choose your own adventure story for bro history.
I mean, we can do our own episode on that, but it's like,
yeah, but way more though. Just to close that loop, dude. Way more. Way more.
Yes. Well, it's mini. That's the question. That's the thing. So, should we wrap this up?
Yeah, I have no idea how long we've been going, given our technical issue, but I think that probably makes it.
Probably like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks again for listening to another episode of Bro History. Your attendance is always very welcomed, and we appreciate it. If you want to support our show, you can join our Substack, where we post all of our exclusive content, and we post a lot more shit in our Substack than we ever did with our Patreon. We actually really do put a lot of stuff on our Substack, where we do these episodes where they're more, we do episodes where they're more informal, where it's more, we call them shooting the shit, and they're a lot of fun. We do a lot more controversial stuff, things we can't really say on the Apple Podcast stuff.
Yeah.
And we, if you want to see the unedited version of it, then you can go there. And it's a real joy. You also get the episodes without advertisements, which is nice.
It's definitely a big perk. And if that's not enough to sell you, we're doing a sale till the end of April. So you can actually join for $1 a month for the first year. You get access to all the stuff that Henry just said. And what's super interesting, if you want to just go ahead and sub to us for free on Substack, you can actually use your freebie episode and listen to one of our Shoot the Shit episodes or any other episode of your choosing. See if you like it. And if you think it's cool and you want to support us, then you can give us $1 and we'll be happy.
All right. Okay, guys. Peace.
See ya.